Hey Honest Addicts, I'm excited to dig into this week's topic to finish off our quarantine trifecta. The films on today's list focus on children, that would be the age of a toddler until about the age of 10, we'll say, who go off the rails. Horror movies with kids as the antagonist are always interesting in my book as they don't have that fully developed brain yet and are too concerned with their own inner id. They don't realize that their actions have consequences and clearly have a knack for killing their own kin. But I mean, you can't really blame the kids, can you? I mean, their parents raised them, so the apple must not have fallen too far from the tree. Let's examine the top 5 shithead kids in cinema and see what they did to land on today's list. Some were leaders, others followers, but all are dead now. I'm your barren host, Jackie K, and this is Honest Pop Culture Reviews. I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and help us get to 5 total likes on today's video. I would appreciate it quite a bit. Let's get started. Number 5, Isaac Kroner, Children of the Corn. Stephen King has been a return contender on our quarantine trifecta list. He had 2 slots for the women, 1 in the men, and we'll just see how many times he ends up on today's list for kids. But he does break in here at the number 5 with Isaac Kroner, the leader of the notorious Children of the Corn. We place these shitty kids who literally murder every single adult in their town, craft their own religion, and kill any outlander that trespasses in their realm at the bottom of today's list, because although all the previously mentioned is scary as hell, the movie overall is not the best. It has some interesting special effects for a film from 1984, and it could have a much tighter narrative, but if you go into it with low expectations, I think you'll find you may actually enjoy the film, especially with such a killer performance by Linda Hamilton. She never really phones it in. Children of the Corn is, well, excuse the pun, but a corny film 35 years after the fact. But the kids are still a bunch of assholes, and you can currently watch The Massacres of the Midwest on Hulu right now. Number 4, Mara/David, Village of the Damned. Imagine living in a small village. Life is idyllic and perfect. One day, for reasons unknown to both the village and the government, everyone passes out. No matter what they're doing, they could be driving into town, they could be cooking a barbecue, or even flying a plane. Then, about 10 of your fertile women after you all wake up are suddenly pregnant. You're one of them. You give birth on the same day. The children have weird eyes. They have blonde hair and grow at an accelerated, strange rate. Turns out, they're aliens, and they're not here to be friendly. The original Village of the Damned was led by a boy, David, and in the classic black and white film, when you get on the bad side of any one of these children, they find one way or another for you to self-torture or commit suicide by accident. In the 1995 remake by John Carpenter, starring Christopher Reeve, Mark Hamill, and Kirstie Alley, back when she was still relevant, the head kid is Mara, who is pretty damn terrifying, if I might say so myself. She takes absolutely no prisoners. Both films are classics in their own rights and during their own time, although the original is short enough that it just seems like a double episode of The Twilight Zone, especially in its black and white style. Regardless of which you choose to watch, you get to see some creepy ass kids convince a lot of adults to go into harm's way. Both are available to rent on your usual sites. Number 3, Bagul's Kids, Sinister. The 2012 crime horror mystery is actually a truly terrifying film. It deserves all the recognition, if you ask me, although it does use its musical score to influence you heavily. If you were to remove the score and watch it under the influence, it would be more of a comedy than a horror film, but they usually tread lightly together regardless. Back to the topic at hand. Bagul, the boogeyman in this film, torments the youngest child from a family into murdering their entire kin in a truly gruesome manner. He's been doing this for decades. Every time a family moves into a new home, they start to deal with some crazy, haunting shit, decide to leave, which is usually the smart thing to do, but really, that's when Bagul strikes. It is clever, really. How would anyone notice a pattern of a family being murdered in different houses after they move out of the previous family's murdered home? It's an interesting twist on the haunted house trope, which brings in many elements of slasher as well. Sinister and its 2015 sequel are both available on Netflix. Number 2, Damien Thorn, The Omen. A demonic child film following on the successful coattails of The Exorcist, we have Damien Thorn, the literal son of the devil, Lucifer himself. What's interesting about placing Damien here, this high on the list, is that he is not completely responsible for all of the deaths that take place throughout the first film. Yes, he is certainly a shithead kid to the woman who's raising him as his mother, but aside from that, he's mostly a victim of circumstance in the original first installment. Although his real deal daddy gets a lot of his followers to murder people for him, so regardless, these two poor parents of Damien Thorn were raising the devil's seed. What does that do to a person? The same way that perhaps the Dursleys weren't terrible people, they were just stuck in a house with a magic Hitler's Horcrux for 11 years. I bet that would make the nicest people into just terrible trash. But my heart goes out to the Thorns right now, which is who we're focusing on, not Dumbledore being a complete piece of trash professor. No. That poor woman knew something was wrong with Damien, and she never knew that he wasn't really hers, so she must have thought her womb created the most diabolical seed. The original Omen has always seemed like a disjointed story to me, but it is a timeless classic that any horror buff should watch. What's really interesting about the deaths in these films are that the majority of them take place during the day outside in the sunshine, which always makes things a little bit spookier in my own opinion. The 1976 original and the 2006 30 years later remake are both available for free on Starz or to rent on your usual platforms. Honorable mention, Esther, Orphan. Esther would have gotten her own spot today if it wasn't for the twist in her film. Esther is a terrifying Russian orphan who is replacing the hole in her adoptive parents' hearts after they had lost a child themselves. But when she starts to torture her new siblings and even murder a nun, we soon realize that she isn't the cute young girl we imagined her to be. Orphan is a hell of a scary story, one of those few late-aught horror films that actually deliver with such an odd premise. If you haven't seen The Orphan yet, I don't want to spoil too much of it for you, but she is definitely a shithead kid for the ages, and it is currently available to rent on Amazon Vudu and other similar renting services. Number 1, Gage Creed, Pet Sematary. Here we have it again, folks. Stephen King bringing it in for a second time on the creepy kids. Although, it's a bit of an exception. Poor little Gage Creed didn't ask to die, be resurrected on Indian tribal ground by his grieving father, and come back to life as the undead to murder his entire family and caring neighbor. All he wanted to do was fly his kite with his family. It certainly wasn't his fault that his family was dumb enough to take their eyes off of him near a highway road with huge rigs traveling down it without a fence installed. I'm sorry, that just really irritates the absolute hell out of me. But, I mean, come on. There were 3 adults there. How did all 3 of them screw up at the exact same time? It doesn't make any sense. But, in my very humble opinion, as your dutiful host, I believe that the original 1989 Pet Sematary is one of the scariest films I've ever seen. I viewed it for the first time as a teenager, and that little Gage looked just like one of my blonde cousins, and that was enough for me. Although it is a bit dated 31 years later, I still think it had a terrifying concept wrapped up in grief, anguish, and depression. It focuses on the most difficult emotions we face as adults, and I mean, what would you do in Gage's father's position? You lose your child far too soon, and wouldn't you want to try to bring him back as well? I mean, who wouldn't side with Louis Creed here? But what's dead should stay dead. Pet Sematary is available to stream on Prime and supposedly Hulu, and for all that is good, please, 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 please avoid the 2019 remake at all costs. It's a straight dumpster fire. Well, honest addicts, there's the end of our list and our quarantine trifecta. I hope you've enjoyed reviewing the top 15 terrible family members in cinema and realized that maybe being stuck inside for multiple months during COVID-19 with your family wasn't as bad as you originally thought. What do you think? Should I take a gander at teenagers in horror next? Those guys are assholes too. But before we move on to our next themed video, we'll be reviewing May's releases on Netflix. I hope to see you again next week for that. And if you're wondering why I'm slightly lower in this week's video and you stuck around all the way to the end, I will tell you, I got myself a director's chair, something that I've always wanted personally with my obsession with Hollywood and films. And finally, at the age of 30, I gifted one to myself for these videos specifically. It has orange and it's black, two of my favorite things. Just like my room here, so I'm pretty happy with it. I'm happy to have it, and hopefully I won't seem too tired by the end of these lists because I won't be standing up the entire time. Really, it's here for you guys to improve your experience with my videos. But now that we've come to a close, in the meantime, until I see you next week, keep washing your hands, wear that mask in public, crowded places, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. We're trying to get a nice little 5 likes on this video, and I would truly appreciate it. Stay healthy and be better. Thanks for stopping by. I've been your childless host, Jackie K, keeping pop culture honest. I'm your barren host. I'm your barren host, Jackie K, and this is Number 3, Bagul's Kids, Sinister. The 2012 crime horror mystery is actually a Back to the topic at hand, Back to the topic at hand. Bagul. Why do I keep saying Bogle? Which always makes things a little bit spoopier. Additionally, if you're wondering why I might be slightly lower in today's video, I recently got myself a director's chair. It is orange and black and it's tall, and I just dropped my mouse. The poor thing. Let's try that again.